I was 53 when Marcus told me we couldn't get married because of my hair. Not because he didn't love me. Not because we weren't compatible. Because my natural curls didn't fit the image he needed for his corporate life. He said it standing in my kitchen, coffee still warm in his hand, like he was commenting on the weather. Baby, you know I adore you, but the partner's wives. They have a certain look. Can't you just straighten it? For us. The words landed soft but cut deep, like a blade wrapped in silk. I'd spent 2 years with this man, cooked his favorite meals, met his colleagues, laughed at his mother's passive-aggressive comments about women who let themselves go. And now my God-given hair was the problem. I didn't cry that day. I smiled, nodded, and watched him leave my apartment for the last time. His footsteps echoing down the hallway like a countdown I hadn't started yet. What he didn't know was that I'd already learned to read betrayal in the smallest gestures, the micro-pauses before compliments, the way his eyes would skip over me at company events when someone more acceptable walked by. I'd been building a life he thought he could edit with, like I was a rough draft waiting for his approval. But life has a twisted sense of humor. 15 years later, I'm standing in my salon, the one I built from nothing after Marcus walked away. My hands move through a client's hair, thick coil springing back with each twist, and the door chimes. A white woman in her 30s walks in, nervous energy radiating off her like heat. She's clutching her phone, and behind her, holding her hand, is a little girl with pin-straight blonde hair and Marcus's exact eyes. Before I can process what I'm seeing, the woman speaks. Are you Elena? My husband said you're the best with natural hair. Our daughter saw your Instagram and she's been begging for curls like yours for months. We've tried everything but... She trails off, glancing at her daughter with a mixture of love and exhaustion. The universe had just placed Marcus's daughter in my chair, wanting the very thing he'd rejected me for. How do you respond when the life that discarded you comes crawling back, not with an apology, but with a request? I recognized her immediately. Not just the eyes, but the way she tilted her head when she was uncertain, exactly like Marcus used to do when he was about to ask me for something he knew I shouldn't give. His daughter, his wife, standing in the space I'd built from the ashes of what he'd burned down. The irony was so sharp I could taste it. Metallic and bitter, like biting down on foil. Could have said no. Could have told them I was fully booked for months, sent them to another stylist, let the door close on this strange circular moment. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the little girl looked at the photos on my wall, images of women with crowns of coils and twists, their faces glowing with the kind of confidence that only comes from acceptance. Maybe it was the memory of my own daughter at that age, before the world started whispering that her hair was too much, too wild, too different. Or maybe, if I'm honest, it was curiosity. What kind of woman had Marcus chosen after me? What kind of life had he built with someone whose hair passed his test? I have an opening, I heard myself say. The words came out smooth, professional, like my heart wasn't hammering against my ribs. What's your name, sweetheart? I knelt down to the girl's level and she whispered, Lily. Her mother's hand tightened on her shoulder, protective, and I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. Just another black woman with a skill she needed. Or did she sense the history hanging in the air between us, invisible but present, like humidity before a storm? That's when I realized this wasn't just about hair. Never is really. Every coil, every kink, every strand carries a story. A choice, a declaration of who we decide to be when the world tells us we're not enough. Marcus had taught me that lesson in the cruelest way possible, but I'd turned it into something else, something mine. The salon wasn't just a business. It was proof that what he'd rejected had value, that I had value, that the version of me he'd wanted to erase was actually the version worth celebrating. Lily climbed into my chair, small hands gripping the armrests, and her mother settled into the waiting area, scrolling through her phone. She had no idea. No idea that 15 years ago her husband had stood in my kitchen and delivered a verdict on my worth based on keratin and melanin. No idea that the woman about to touch her daughter's hair had once imagined a different future, one where Marcus and I built something together instead of him building it with her. You know what's strange about betrayal? It doesn't always announce itself with drama and slammed doors. Sometimes it just sits there, patient, waiting for you to grow strong enough to see it clearly. And when you do, when you finally understand what you escaped rather than what you lost, the world starts looking different. Sharper. More honest. That's why so many people choose to stay here, following these stories through every twist and revelation, because they recognize that moment of clarity, that instant when pain transforms into power. I sectioned Lily's hair, feeling the fine texture between my fingers, so different from my own. "Your daddy ever tell you about natural hair?" I asked, keeping my voice light, conversational. She shook her head. Her mother glanced up from her phone, suddenly alert, and I caught something in her expression. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. Like she knew there were questions she should have asked before walking through my door but didn't know how to form them. And that's when I understood. This wasn't an accident. This was an opportunity dressed up as coincidence. And I was standing at a crossroads I hadn't seen coming. The appointment stretched over 2 hours. Lily wanted box braids with beads, the kind that click and swing when you move your head, the kind that announce your presence before you enter a room. Her mother agreed nervously, checking her watch twice, making small talk that felt rehearsed. She mentioned Marcus once, casually, saying he was at a conference in Atlanta. Business development. Same corporate world he'd inhabited when we were together, same ladder he'd been climbing, same image he'd been protecting. I worked carefully, my fingers moving through the familiar pattern of sectioning and braiding, while Lily chattered about school and her friends and a boy named Tyler who pulled her hair last week. "He said it looked weird," she told me, her voice small. "He said I should make it normal." The mother's face tightened, and I saw something flicker across it. Recognition maybe. Or guilt. How many times had she heard similar words? How many times had she watched her daughter navigate a world that treated difference like a defect? "What did you tell Tyler?" I asked, keeping my hand steady even though anger was rising in my chest, familiar and hot. "Nothing. I just cried." Lily's honesty cut through the room like glass. 8 years old and already learning to internalize shame, already understanding that her body was up for public commentary and judgment. Been there. My daughter had been there. Generations of us had been there, sitting in that exact moment, deciding whether to fight back or fold inward. I paused, met her eyes in the mirror. "Next time Tyler says something, you tell him your hair is a crown, and crowns aren't meant to look like everyone else's. You tell him normal is boring, and you're not." Her face brightened, transformed, and her mother looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. Gratitude mixed with something darker. Envy, perhaps. Or loss. That's when she asked the question I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting. "How long have you had this salon?" Her tone was careful, probing, like she was testing the temperature of water before diving in. 15 years, I said. "Built it from scratch after a relationship ended badly. Turns out rejection can be a hell of a motivator." I kept my voice light, conversational, but I watched her face in the mirror, looking for recognition, for any sign that Marcus had mentioned me, that my name had come up in their marriage, that I was anything more than a ghost he'd successfully buried. Nothing. Just polite interest. Which meant either he'd never told her, or she was a better actress than I'd given her credit for. Both options felt like small victories and large insults simultaneously. "Marcus grew up around here," she said suddenly, and the name hung between us like a confession. "He doesn't talk much about his past, but he mentioned there was a good natural hair salon in this neighborhood. Said someone he used to know ran it. I looked you up online and your work is incredible. Lily's been following your Instagram for months." The room tilted. Marcus had sent them here. Maybe not directly, maybe not consciously, but he'd planted the seed, mentioned my name, pointed his wife and daughter toward the woman he'd discarded because her hair didn't meet his standards. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The cruelty was surgical. Or maybe he genuinely didn't see the problem. Maybe in his mind enough time had passed that the wound he'd inflicted had healed over, become neutral, become nothing. Men like Marcus never understand that some rejections don't fade. They calcify. They become foundational. They shape the architecture of who you build yourself into afterward. I finished Lily's last braid, added the final beads, and spun her chair around so she could see the full effect. Her squeal of delight was genuine, pure, the kind of joy that exists before the world teaches you to question your own beauty. Her mother smiled, pulled out her phone to take pictures, and I saw her hand tremble slightly. She knew something was off. Women always know. We're trained from birth to read the room, to sense danger in the shift of a tone, the pause before a response. There's a father-daughter dance at her school next month, the mother said, still looking at Lily's reflection, not at me. Marcus is going to lose his mind when he sees this. And there it was. The moment I'd been circling since they walked through my door. The choice I had to make. Let it go and take their money and send them back into their lives, or tell the truth and watch everything explode. I didn't tell the truth that day. I let them leave with smiles and promises to return. Let Lily skip out the door with her beads clicking a rhythm that sounded like freedom. Let the mother pay with a credit card that probably had Marcus's name embossed on it. I watched them through the window as they got into a silver SUV, the kind of vehicle that screams suburban stability, the kind of life I might have had if my hair had been straight enough, if my blackness had been quiet enough, if I'd been willing to sand down my edges to fit into his carefully constructed world. After they left, I sat in the empty salon, surrounded by the smell of shea butter and the ghost of their presence, and I cried. Not because I still loved Marcus. That part of me had died a long time ago, buried under layers of self-discovery and hard-won pride. I cried because his daughter was beautiful and innocent and didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of whatever was about to happen. I cried because his wife seemed kind, seemed tired, seemed like maybe she'd made compromises too. Different compromises than the one I'd refused to make, but compromises nonetheless. But mostly I cried because I was angry. Angry that 15 years later Marcus still had the power to disrupt my peace, to walk back into my life through a side door I hadn't seen coming. Angry that the universe had handed me this test, this choice, this moment where I could either be the bigger person or be the person who finally got even. My phone buzzed. A notification. They'd tagged me on Instagram. Lily's mother had posted a photo of her daughter's new braids with a caption that made my stomach drop. Found the most amazing stylist today. Elena at Crown and Glory Salon transformed my baby girl. Thank you for making her feel beautiful. Marcus was right about you being the best. 3 heart emojis. 47 likes already. And in the comments someone had written, "Wait, isn't that the place Marcus used to date the owner?" Small world. There it was. The crack in the facade. Someone remembered. Someone knew. And now it was out there, public, connecting dots that Marcus had probably hoped would stay scattered forever. It's in these moments that many people feel something shift. A recognition that silence isn't always strength, that sometimes speaking up is the only way forward. That's when they leave a signal, a small gesture of support, showing they understand what it means to choose dignity over comfort. I stared at that comment for 20 minutes, watching more people like it, watching the questions start to form in the thread. The wife hadn't responded yet. Maybe she hadn't seen it. Maybe she was in the car driving home, singing along to whatever song Lily had chosen, still blissfully unaware that her husband's past had just collided with her present in the most public way possible. I could delete the tag. Ask them to take down the post. Pretend I hadn't seen it. But that felt like hiding, and I'd spent 15 years learning not to hide anymore. My hair was bigger now than it had been when Marcus knew me. Fuller, more unapologetic. My business was thriving. My daughter was in college studying law, determined to fight the battles I'd learned to fight too late. I'd built a life that didn't need his approval or anyone else's. So I made a choice. I commented on the post. Lily was a dream client. So glad she loves her new look. It's always special when a child learns to embrace what makes them unique. Thank you for trusting me with her crown. Professional, kind, neutral, but also present, also visible, also refusing to disappear just because my existence made someone uncomfortable. The response was immediate. More likes, more comments, and then an hour later a private message from the wife. Can we talk? I think there's something I need to understand. My hands shook as I read those words. This was it. The moment where I could either open the door to chaos or close it forever. Where I could tell her everything. Show her who Marcus really was beneath the corporate polish and the carefully managed image. Or I could protect the illusion of her marriage and let her keep living in ignorance. But here's what I'd learned in 15 years of running my own business, of raising a daughter alone, of building a community of women who'd all been told in different ways that they weren't enough. The truth doesn't destroy what's real. It only destroys what's false. And if Marcus's marriage was built on the same foundation as our relationship had been, built on her making herself smaller, quieter, more acceptable, then maybe she deserved to know there was another option. Maybe she deserved to know that freedom sometimes looks like walking away from everything you thought you wanted. I agreed to meet her the next morning at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my salon, neutral territory where neither of us had history. I arrived early, ordered black coffee I didn't drink, and watched the door like I was waiting for a verdict. When she walked in, I saw her differently than I had the day before. Without Lily as a buffer, without the distraction of beads and braids and professional small talk, she looked exhausted. The kind of tired that lives in your bones, that no amount of sleep can fix. She sat down across from me without ordering anything, folded her hands on the table like she was preparing for a job interview. "How long were you together?" she asked. No preamble, no pretense. Just the question that had probably kept her awake all night. 2 years, I said. Ended 15 years ago. She nodded slowly, processing the math, maybe calculating how long she and Marcus had been together, looking for overlap, looking for betrayal in the timeline. "He never mentioned you. Not once. But when I saw that comment yesterday when someone said you two used to date, I asked him about it. He said it was nothing. Said you were just someone he knew casually, that it didn't work out, that it was ancient history." Her voice was steady but her hands weren't. They trembled slightly, fingers twisting around each other like they were trying to hold something together that was already falling apart. "That's one way to describe it," I said, and the bitterness in my voice surprised me. I'd thought I was past this, thought I'd processed and healed and moved on, but sitting across from the woman who got the life I'd been rejected from, I realized some wounds don't heal. They just become part of your landscape. Familiar scars you stop noticing until someone presses on them. She leaned forward. "Tell me the truth, please. I need to know what I'm dealing with." So I told her. Not everything, not the intimate details that belonged only to me and Marcus, but enough. I told her about the kitchen conversation, about his concern for his corporate image, about the specific words he'd used when he explained that my natural hair was too much, too ethnic, too visible for the life he was building. I told her how he'd asked me to straighten it, how he'd framed it as a compromise, as something small I could do for us, for our future, like changing my hair was equivalent to picking a different restaurant for dinner. She listened without interrupting, her face going through a series of transformations I recognized from my own mirror 15 years ago. Denial, anger, recognition. That last one was the worst. The moment when pieces you didn't know were scattered suddenly clicked into place, forming a picture you didn't want to see. "He asked me to cut my hair shorter when we first started dating," she said quietly. "Said he preferred it above the shoulders. Professional. I thought he was just being helpful, giving me style advice. I didn't realize it was a test." Her laugh was hollow, sharp-edged. "I've been passing tests I didn't know I was taking for 10 years. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women on different sides of the same man's selective vision, both of us shaped by his preferences in ways we were only now beginning to understand. The coffee shop hummed around us with the morning rush. People ordering lattes and checking phones and living normal lives where their hair didn't determine their worth, where love didn't come with conditions disguised as suggestions. "Why did you do Lily's braids?" she asked suddenly. "You could have turned us away. You could have told us you were booked. Why didn't you?" I considered lying, considered giving her some noble answer about professionalism or taking the high road. But I was tired of performance. Tired of making other people comfortable with carefully chosen words. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I wanted to see what he'd chosen instead of me. Maybe I wanted to prove something to myself. Or maybe I just saw a little girl who deserved to feel beautiful, and I couldn't let your husband's issues become her issues too. She absorbed that, eyes wet but not crying, holding it together with the kind of control that comes from years of practice. He's going to be furious when he sees her hair. Not at her. Never at her. But he'll find a way to make it my fault, say I should have supervised better, should have known better. He does that. Makes you feel like your own instincts are wrong, like you need his guidance to make good decisions. I recognized that pattern. I lived it. The slow erosion of self-trust, the constant second-guessing, the way he'd positioned himself as the expert on what was acceptable and what wasn't. It was violence disguised as care, control dressed up as concern. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time, and I saw something shift in her expression, something hardening into resolve. "I don't know yet. But I know I'm not going to ask him to fix this. I'm not going to apologize. And I'm not going to make Lily take out those braids." She stood up, pulled her purse over her shoulder, and extended her hand. "Thank you. For telling me the truth. For not protecting him." I shook her hand, felt the firmness of her grip, and understood that whatever happened next wasn't my responsibility. Planted a seed. What grew from it belonged to her. 3 days passed without contact. 3 days where I checked my phone compulsively, wondering if Marcus had discovered what happened, if he'd stormed into my salon, if he'd called to rage or threaten or demand an explanation. But there was only silence, the kind that feels like pressure building before a storm, and I moved through my appointments in a fog of anticipation and dread. Then the father-daughter dance happened. I didn't attend, obviously, but I heard about it. The whole neighborhood heard about it because Lily's mother posted photos, dozens of them, and in every single one Lily's braids were visible and celebrated and perfect. Marcus was in some of the pictures, smiling that corporate smile that never quite reached his eyes. His hand on his daughter's shoulder, playing the role of proud father while probably seething underneath. But it was the caption that made my breath catch. My daughter asked for braids because she wanted to look like the strong, beautiful black women she admires. Tonight she told everyone at the dance about the amazing stylist, who taught her that her crown doesn't need to look like everyone else's. I'm learning that lesson too. Better late than never. The comments exploded. Hundreds of them. Women sharing their own stories of being told to change, to minimize, to make themselves more palatable. I read through them late at night, my salon quiet and dark around me, and I felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't about me and Marcus anymore. It had become bigger than our small, painful history. It had become about every woman who'd ever been asked to shrink herself for someone else's comfort. My daughter called me that night from her dorm room. Her voice breathless with excitement. "Mom, did you see? Your client's post is going viral. People are sharing it everywhere, talking about standards of beauty and how we police black women's hair. Someone even started a hashtag. This is incredible." I should have felt vindicated. Should have felt like justice had been served in some cosmic, poetic way. But mostly I felt sad. Sad that it took a white woman's revelation to make people pay attention to something black women had been saying for generations. Sad that Marcus's daughter had to be the catalyst for her mother's awakening. Sad that we still lived in a world where a child's hairstyle could become a battleground for identity and acceptance. But underneath the sadness was something else. Something harder and sharper and more durable. Pride. Not the arrogant kind, but the quiet kind that comes from surviving something that was supposed to break you and emerging with your humanity intact. I'd built something real from the wreckage of Marcus's rejection. I'd turned pain into purpose, humiliation into a thriving business that helped other women feel beautiful in their own skin. The message came a week later from an unknown number. Short, direct, unmistakably Marcus. "We need to talk. This has gone too far." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the old familiar fear try to take root in my stomach, the muscle memory of caring what he thought, of wanting his approval, of measuring my worth by his standards. But the fear didn't stick. It slid off me like water off glass, leaving nothing behind but clarity. I typed my response slowly, deliberately, choosing each word with the care of someone who'd spent 15 years learning exactly what she wanted to say. "There's nothing to discuss. Your wife brought your daughter to my salon. I did my job. What happened after that is between you and your family. I'm not part of your life anymore, and you're not part of mine. Don't contact me again. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, before the old version of me who'd cried in her kitchen could convince me to soften the message, to leave a door open, to prioritize his comfort over my boundaries. The typing dots appeared immediately, disappeared, appeared again. He was struggling to respond, struggling to find the words that would put me back in the box he'd built for me 15 years ago, the box labeled mistake or phase or woman who wasn't quite right. But I didn't wait to see what he'd say. I blocked the number, deleted the conversation. And for the first time since his wife and daughter walked through my door, I felt something close to peace. That's when I understood the real revenge wasn't in exposing him or ruining his marriage or proving I'd been right all along. The real revenge was in becoming someone who didn't need revenge at all. Someone who'd built a life so full and rich and meaningful that his opinion of me had become irrelevant. Someone who could look at the woman he'd chosen instead and feel compassion instead of jealousy, solidarity instead of competition. The game he'd been playing required me to stay small, to stay hurt, to stay defined by what he'd taken from me. And I'd simply refused to play. 2 months later, Lily's mother filed for divorce. I didn't hear it from her directly. I heard it from my receptionist, who heard it from a client, who heard it from someone at the school where Lily attended. The neighborhood grapevine works faster than any news network. And in a community like ours, where everyone knows everyone's business, a divorce is front-page material. Especially when it involves someone like Marcus, someone who'd built his entire identity around the image of success and stability. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant, wanted to see it as karma finally catching up, as the universe correcting an old injustice. But triumph felt hollow when I thought about Lily, about how she'd become an accidental catalyst for her parents' unraveling, about how she'd carry that weight whether anyone told her to or not. Children always know. They sense the fractures even when adults try to hide them, feel the tension in silences and careful words and doors that close too quietly. The wife came back to the salon 3 weeks after I heard about the divorce. No appointment. Just walked in during a gap between clients and stood near the door like she wasn't sure she was welcome. I gestured her toward my chair without a word, and she sat down heavily, like her body was carrying more than it could hold. "I'm not here for my hair," she said. "I just wanted you to know that the braids weren't the reason. They were just the thread I pulled that unraveled everything else." Once I started looking, really looking, I saw patterns everywhere. The way he talked about my friends who didn't fit his aesthetic. The comments about my weight after Lily was born. The way he'd steer conversations at parties, editing me in real time like I was a script that needed rewrites. She paused, swallowed hard. "You gave me permission to see what I'd been trained to ignore." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold the weight of being someone's awakening, someone's catalyst, someone's reason for blowing up a life that from the outside probably looked perfect. So I just listened, the way I'd learned to listen to clients over the years, understanding that sometimes people don't need advice or solutions. They just need a witness. "He tried to blame you," she continued. "Said you'd manipulated the situation, that you were bitter and vengeful and trying to destroy what we had. But that's the thing about manipulation. Once you learn to recognize it, you see it everywhere." And I realized he was describing himself, projecting his own tactics onto you. She laughed, sharp and bitter. 15 years you've been free of him. 15 years I've been living the life you escaped." The word escaped hung between us, stark and true. That's exactly what I'd done, though I hadn't understood it at the time. I'd thought I'd been rejected, cast aside, deemed insufficient. But I'd actually been released from a cage I hadn't realized I was entering, spared from decades of slow erosion disguised as partnership. "Lily asks about you constantly," she said, shifting topics. "Wants to know when she can come back, when you can teach her more styles. She's been watching natural hair tutorials online, practicing on her dolls. You inspired something in her that I don't want to take away, but I also don't want to put you in an awkward position." I considered it. The risk of staying connected to Marcus's family, of becoming a permanent fixture in the drama of his dissolution. The easier path would be to draw a clean line, to wish them well and send them to another stylist. But then I thought about 8-year-old me, desperate for someone to tell me my hair was beautiful, that I didn't need to change to be worthy. Thought about how much of my life I'd spent unlearning the lies I'd absorbed before I was old enough to question them. Bring her back, I said. She's not responsible for her father's choices. None of this is her burden to carry. Relief flooded the woman's face, followed immediately by tears she'd probably been holding back since she walked in. I handed her tissues, waited while she composed herself, and felt something shift in the air between us. We weren't friends. Probably never would be. But we were something. Connected by the same man's damage in different ways. Survivors of different versions of the same story. She left with a promise to schedule Lily's next appointment, and I watched her through the window as she got into that same silver SUV, noticing for the first time how worn she looked, how the corporate wife polish had faded to reveal someone rawer and more real underneath. If you're watching this and you've ever been told to change something fundamental about yourself for someone else's comfort, I want to know. What was it? Your hair, your voice, your dreams, your fire. Drop it in the comments. Sometimes we need to see our stories reflected back to us to understand we're not alone in them. The salon was quiet after she left. Just me and the familiar smell of products and the low hum of the air conditioning. I thought about Marcus, about whether he understood yet what he'd lost, whether he was capable of that kind of self-reflection, or if he'd spend the rest of his life blaming everyone else for the loneliness he'd engineered. I thought about his daughter, growing up in the aftermath of her parents' failed marriage, and hoped she'd remember that her braids had been an act of self-love, not an act of destruction. Lily came back the following month, this time without her mother. Her grandmother dropped her off, a black woman in her 70s with silver locks pulled back in a regal bun, who looked at me with knowing eyes and said simply, "Thank you for what you did." She didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. Some women recognize each other across generations, understand the specific battles fought over bodies and boundaries and the right to exist unapologetically. Lily climbed into my chair chattering about school and friends and a book report she'd written on Maya Angelou. "My teacher said I write like I'm older than I am," she told me proudly. She said I have perspective. I smiled at that, braiding her hair while she talked, and wondered if trauma aged you faster or if maybe survival taught you to see clearly sooner. Either way, this child was watching her parents' marriage dissolve and somehow still managing to find joy in beads and books and the small victories of 8-year-old life. "My dad hasn't talked to me in 3 weeks, she said suddenly, voice small. "Mom says he's busy with work, but I know that's not true. He's mad about something and I think it's about my hair, but I don't understand why hair matters so much." She caught my eyes in the mirror, searching for an answer I wasn't sure I should give. I paused, braid half finished in my hands. Sometimes people get angry when other people make choices they don't understand. Your dad grew up in a world that taught him certain things about beauty and success and fitting in. When you chose braids, you chose something different from what he learned, and that scared him. But that's his fear, not your mistake. Your hair is perfect exactly the way it is. She nodded slowly, processing. "Mom says we're going to live with Grandma for a while. Says it's an adventure, but I heard her crying last night, so I don't think it's the good kind of adventure. The honesty of children is brutal sometimes. The way they cut through adult pretense and name things we try to hide." I finished her braids in silence, adding purple beads this time because she'd requested them, and when I spun her chair around she smiled so wide I felt something crack open in my chest. This child was going to be fine. Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but eventually. She had a mother who'd chosen truth over comfort, a grandmother who radiated strength, and now a hairstylist who'd inadvertently shown her that refusing to shrink yourself could cost everything and still be worth it. After Lily left, I sat in my empty salon and thought about Marcus, about how he was missing his daughter's childhood because he couldn't let go of an image that never mattered in the first place. Thought about how many moments he'd sacrificed to his pride, how many memories he'd forfeit because admitting he was wrong felt more dangerous than losing the people who loved him. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd rejected me to protect an image, and that same image was now costing him his family. The corporate ladder he'd climbed, the aesthetic he'd maintained, the careful curation of his life. All of it was crumbling because he'd never learned that control is an illusion and people aren't props in someone else's performance. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another message, different number, but I recognized the tone immediately. Marcus had found a way around the block. "You've destroyed my family. I hope you're satisfied. This is what happens when bitter people can't move on." The words were designed to hurt, to make me doubt, to transfer his guilt onto my shoulders like I was responsible for his choices. I read it twice, feeling nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a distant recognition that some people spend their entire lives blaming everyone else for the consequences of their own actions, convinced that the world is conspiring against them when really they're just experiencing the natural results of treating people like objects to be managed rather than humans to be respected. I didn't respond. Didn't block the new number either. Just left it there, unanswered. A silence that said more than any words could. Because the truth Marcus still hadn't learned was that I didn't destroy his family. He did. Slowly, methodically, over years of small cuts disguised as guidance, of conditions disguised as love, of control disguised as care. I'd just been the mirror that reflected it back clearly enough that his wife finally saw what she'd been living with. That night I dreamed about the kitchen conversation from 15 years ago, but this time when Marcus told me my hair was a problem, I didn't cry. I laughed. Threw my head back and laughed at the absurdity of a man thinking he had the authority to edit my body, the audacity of believing his comfort mattered more than my identity. And in the dream I walked out, not heartbroken but liberated, understanding already what took me years to learn in real life. That rejection from the wrong person is actually protection. I woke up feeling lighter than I had in months, like I'd finally closed a chapter that had been left hanging open, pages fluttering in the wind, never quite finishing. Marcus and I were done. Not because he'd apologized or learned or changed, but because I'd stopped waiting for him to. I'd stopped needing his understanding to validate my worth. I'd stopped letting his opinion of me 15 years ago determine my opinion of myself today. The real victory wasn't in his marriage failing. It was in mine thriving. Not a romantic marriage, but a marriage to myself, to my business, to my community, to the woman I'd become when I stopped trying to fit into spaces that were never built for me in the first place. 6 months passed. The salon expanded, taking over the empty storefront next door, doubling the space and the number of chairs. I hired 3 new stylists, all women who'd come to me with stories similar to mine, women who'd been told in different ways that they needed to be smaller, quieter, more acceptable. We built something together that felt less like a business and more like a sanctuary, a place where women could sit down carrying the weight of the world's judgment and leave feeling lighter, crowned, seen. Lily became a regular, coming in every 6 weeks like clockwork, sometimes with her mother, sometimes with her grandmother, once with a group of friends from school who all wanted braids for a dance recital. She was growing up in front of me, losing baby teeth and gaining confidence, and I watched her transform from a child seeking permission to exist into someone who assumed she had the right to take up space. That shift was subtle but unmistakable. The way she'd walk in and announce what style she wanted instead of asking if it was okay. The way she'd correct adults who touched her hair without permission. Her mother came less frequently, but when she did, we talked. Not about Marcus, not anymore, but about the strange territory of rebuilding a life in your 40s after thinking you'd already built it. She'd gone back to school, was studying social work, wanted to help women leaving difficult marriages navigate the legal and emotional maze she'd just survived. "I keep thinking about all the signs I ignored," she told me once. "All the times I felt small and convinced myself I was being too sensitive. I don't want other women to waste as much time as I did." I understood that impulse, the need to transform pain into purpose, to make suffering mean something by using it to prevent someone else's. But I also knew that some lessons can't be taught, only learned through direct experience. You can warn someone about fire, but until they touch it themselves, they don't really understand the burn. Marcus tried to contact me twice more over those 6 months. Once through a mutual acquaintance who didn't know our history, asking if I'd be willing to do Lily's hair for her birthday. I sent back a polite message saying Lily was welcome any time her mother scheduled an appointment, but I wouldn't communicate with him directly. The second time was an email to the salon's business account. A long rambling message that started with accusations and ended with something that almost resembled an apology but wasn't quite. "You were good for me," he wrote. "I just wasn't ready for what you represented. Maybe if we'd met at a different time, things would have been different." I deleted it without responding because I'd learned that some people apologize not to make amends but to ease their own guilt, to extract forgiveness as a balm for their conscience without actually changing the behavior that required forgiveness in the first place. Marcus wanted me to tell him he was a good person who'd made a mistake, wanted me to absolve him so he could move forward without the weight of being someone who'd hurt people. But that absolution wasn't mine to give, and even if it was, I wouldn't have offered it. Some things shouldn't be forgiven easily. Some action should cost something. What surprised me was how little I thought about him anymore. 4 years after our breakup, he'd occupied space in my mind like a ghost I couldn't exorcise, and I'd measured my progress against his memory, proving to an audience of one that I was fine, that I'd thrived, that rejecting me had been his loss. But somewhere along the way he'd faded, became background noise, became irrelevant. The real shift happened on a Thursday afternoon when a young woman came in, maybe 25, with natural hair she'd been transitioning for a year. She sat in my chair and immediately started crying, apologizing through tears for being emotional, explaining that her boyfriend had just broken up with her because he said her natural hair made her look too political, too aggressive, too much. The words were so familiar they echoed, like hearing a song you thought you'd forgotten but actually had memorized years ago. I held her hand and let her cry and told her what no one had told me when I needed to hear it. "You're not too much. You're exactly right. And anyone who can't handle all of you doesn't deserve any of you." She looked at me like I'd handed her something precious, something she'd been searching for, and I realized that's what we do when we survive. We become the person we needed when we were drowning, offer the life raft we wish someone had thrown us. After she left, hair twisted into beautiful locks that would grow with her into whatever future she chose, I sat in the quiet salon and thought about Marcus's daughter, about whether she'd ever know the full story of how her braids had unraveled her parents' marriage, or whether that was a burden she'd be spared. I thought about his ex-wife, probably sitting in a classroom somewhere learning theory about domestic dynamics and power imbalances, studying academically what she'd lived personally. I thought about all the women who'd passed through my doors carrying invisible wounds, how we'd built a community of survivors without ever explicitly naming what we'd survived. And I thought about revenge, about how I'd imagined it would feel when Marcus finally understood what he'd lost, how I'd played out scenarios in my head where he came crawling back and I got to refuse him with the same cold finality he'd once used on me. But the reality was quieter than fantasy, less dramatic, less satisfying in the way I'd expected. Because the best revenge wasn't making him suffer. It was becoming someone who no longer needed him to. The year ended with a celebration at the salon, all the stylists and regular clients gathering for what we'd started calling our Crown and Glory anniversary party. The space was filled with laughter and music and the smell of food someone's grandmother had cooked, and I stood in the middle of it feeling something I hadn't felt in decades. Not the place you're born but the place you build when you finally stop apologizing for existing. Lily showed up with her mother and grandmother, 3 generations of women who'd each fought their own battles with acceptance and image and the right to be seen. Lily's hair was in Senegalese twists now, long and elegant, and she wore them like armor and silk simultaneously, protective and beautiful. She'd brought a card she'd made herself, construction paper and markers and glitter that got everywhere, with words written in careful cursive. "Thank you for teaching me that different is better than same." I kept that card on my mirror at home where I'd see it every morning. A reminder that the work we do matters even when we can't measure its full impact, that changing one life creates ripples we'll never fully witness. Marcus's rejection had set me on a path that led to hundreds of women walking through my doors and leaving with more than just styled hair. They left with permission. Permission to take up space, to refuse shrinking, to understand that being too much for the wrong person means you're exactly right for yourself. On New Year's Eve I closed the salon early and sat alone in the space I'd built, looking at the photos on the walls of clients spanning 15 years. Black women, brown women, women with coils and kinks and textures that the world had spent centuries calling unprofessional, unkempt, unacceptable. And here they were, crowned and glowing and magnificent, each one a small rebellion against standards they'd never agreed to in the first place. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Marcus's voice came through, older somehow, worn down in a way I recognized from my own reflection during the hardest years. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he started, and I almost hung up right there. Almost. "But I wanted you to know that I'm in therapy now, working through some things. And my therapist asked me to make amends with people I've hurt, and your name was first on my list." I let the silence stretch between us, felt him squirm in it, and realized I had a choice. I could let him have his moment of redemption, give him the forgiveness he was seeking so he could check a box on his healing journey and move forward lighter. Or I could tell him the truth. "Marcus," I said slowly, "I appreciate that you're doing work on yourself, but I need you to understand something. Your apology doesn't undo 15 years of me rebuilding what you tried to break. It doesn't erase the message you sent to your own daughter about whose beauty matters and whose doesn't. And it doesn't change the fact that you hurt me not because you were confused or struggling, but because you valued appearance over humanity. That's not something you apologize away. That's something you live with." The line went quiet. Then, "I understand. I'm sorry I called. I won't bother you again." "Good," I said, and meant it. Not with anger but with finality, with a clarity that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're willing to accept. I hung up and felt something settle in my chest, the last piece of an old puzzle finally clicking into place. This was closure. Not him apologizing but me no longer needing him to. Not him understanding what he'd done but me understanding that his understanding was irrelevant. Not reconciliation but release. If this story moved something in you, if you saw yourself in any part of this journey, I want you to do something. Hit that like button not just for the algorithm but as a signal to yourself that you're done shrinking. Drop a comment about the moment you chose yourself over someone else's comfort. And subscribe because there are more stories like this, more journeys of women who refuse to disappear just because someone told them they were too much. This community we're building matters. Your presence here matters. Today I'm 68 years old. My hair is silver now. Natural coils that I wear without apology or explanation. The salon has become an institution in our neighborhood, a place where young girls learn early what took me decades to understand, that you are not required to edit yourself for anyone's consumption, that your crown is not up for debate, that rejection from people who can't see your value is actually protection from wasting your precious time on their limitations. Marcus is somewhere living his life and I'm here living mine. And the distance between those two realities is the space where I found myself. Not despite his rejection but because of it. Not in spite of the pain but through it. That's what they don't tell you about survival. Doesn't make you harder. Makes you clearer. Strips away the pretense and the performance until all that's left is the truth of who you actually are beneath all the versions you tried on for other people's approval. He said he couldn't marry me because of my hair. 15 years later his daughter wants curls like mine. And I'm standing in a salon I built from the ashes of his rejection, surrounded by women who chose themselves, teaching a new generation that different isn't deficit. It's power. That's not revenge. That's resurrection. And it tastes like freedom.